Me gustaría, antes de las conferencias de ellos, tenemos un panel destacado aquí, bienvenidos a todos, y me gustaría que le hagan preguntas, iniciar el panel de preguntas a los expertos referidas al stroke.
Buenas tardes. Primero, agradecer estar acá, la verdad que compartir con toda esta gente tan importante es muy lindo, así que muchas gracias. Con el nacimiento de la terapéutica del stroke y de la terapéutica endovascular del stroke en aquel primer trabajo del 2013, sin dejar de discutir la terapéutica sistémica con el alteplase, se fueron demostrando en los primeros trabajos básicamente que no había un outcome tan bueno en los trabajos más o menos a los 2 años, determinado por el ranking modificado, por la escala de ranking modificado. Mi pregunta va puesta a decir, con toda la experiencia que ustedes tienen y que ustedes manejan, ¿cuál es hoy el paciente que ustedes consideran, más allá de los trabajos, que sí o sí debemos plantearle y no podemos no plantearle la terapéutica dual, ¿sí? La terapéutica sistémica y el endovascular treatment, y el tratamiento endovascular? ¿Por qué planteo esto? Porque nosotros tenemos una realidad por ahí acá en la ciudad en la cual se están dando los primeros pasos en el tratamiento sistémico, más allá de ahora el bienvenido tratamiento endovascular. Entonces, un poco tratar de entender cuál es aquel paciente que sí o sí yo debo brindarle la terapéutica dual, circuito anterior, circuito medio o circuito posterior, y un poco conociendo el timing que tenemos nosotros acá de llegada hacia las instituciones, que realmente si se gestiona de una forma, a nivel ciudad buena, puede ser muy corto el timing de tiempo de llegada del paciente a la unidad de trabajo.
Vale, se oye. Espero después que con mi presentación responderte a prácticamente todo lo que has dicho. A día de hoy, o sea, yo antes del 15 ya no hablo más porque si no es que me enfado, me pongo verde, amarillo, es que me han llamado de todo. Cuando se publica el que tú dices, ¿no? El IMS3, tal, que son muy malos estudios y que a pesar del efecto metodológico que tenía, que era tremendamente malo, porque yo venía de haber participado en el STAR, que probablemente sea la referencia, incluso en esos estudios que eran tremendamente malos, la terapia endovascular salía a favor. Dicho esto, esto está olvidado ya. Yo me he olvidado de ello. A partir del 15 se produce un hito histórico en el cambio del paradigma del tratamiento y hoy ya no hay tratamiento IUV y tratamiento endovascular. Solo existe un tratamiento, que es que empieza en la IUV y termina indefectiblemente en la trombectomía mecánica. Y el perfil del paciente a día de hoy, que tiene clase de evidencia 1A, es decir, la máxima evidencia científica que podemos tener a día de hoy, es muy simple. Menos de 4 horas y media es indicación de IUV, salvo contraindicación por Citrón, etcétera, etcétera, y ha de hacerse la trombectomía mecánica lo antes posible. Por encima de las 4 horas y media hasta las 8 es discutible la puesta no de IUV y es trombectomía mecánica directa, y nos queda a partir de la 8ª hora y todo lo que es el ictus del despertar, que yo espero enseñároslo en el estudio Down, ¿de acuerdo?, que podemos hacer trombectomía mecánica y, atención, probablemente a futuro sin obviar la IUV. ¿Ok? Bueno, ese es el panorama en el que debe de moverse el tratamiento endovascular hoy. ¿Ok?
If I can also answer it, so the very first studies were studies that involved a range of devices. For example, it was tried to use transcranial ultrasound, and that was counted as a mechanical thrombectomy device. The selection of the patients did not even include CT angiography, so you didn't even know was there a major vessel occlusion. Nowadays, there's level 1A evidence that thrombectomy works. And there are very few things in medicine that have such a low level, so low number needed to treat. The number needed to treat, as Alessandro was showing, is only 2.6. That makes mechanical thrombectomy at the moment the single most effective intervention we have in the whole of medicine. There's nothing as effective in cardiology, there's nothing as effective in any other medical part. So with level 1A evidence for the patients with major vessel occlusion now, there is little wiggle room, there's little else we can do as to try and treat those patients. And I have to say I was devastated. You asked which are the patients that are the right patients. Yesterday evening, you had a patient that was a patient with 65 years old, I think, with an M1 occlusion on the left-hand side. Patient right-handed, the functions will be in the left. So the patient has to get thrombolysis, but this would have been the patient that would have had to be selected for mechanical thrombectomy. Because the question is, what is the success level? What do you think is the success level of a patient if you give thrombolysis within half an hour, really short time window, and you have an occlusion of a middle cerebral artery? How often in percent do you think this vessel will open? Give me a number, any number. So the number is only 20–25%. In the big vessels, in the internal carotid artery, it's about 10% only, because there's even more thrombus. And the basilar artery, the numbers that have been described are 4% only. The question is, what is the success level with mechanical thrombectomy? And it's significantly higher. In all the studies, the number has been reliably above 95%. So what you're looking at is you're looking 95% versus 4 or 25%. So with a number needed to treat of only 2.6, this is the single most effective intervention, and that's where we would need to go. So which is the right patient? Any patient that still has rescuable brain tissue and that has a major vessel occlusion. Hey.
Bueno, nosotros desde el ámbito público del Hospital Municipal, más o menos desde el 2015, empezamos con el protocolo de stroke, hacer trombolíticos, hacer tratamiento sistémico. Y tenemos la verdad que un número de casos pequeños, ¿sí? 11, en realidad 12 con el que pasó esta noche. Y las dificultades que hemos visto en cuanto a los pacientes, este número pequeño que hemos tratado, es que a veces la selección de los pacientes no ha sido del todo correcta, a pesar de que, digamos, el hospital hemos recibido un entrenamiento, se han hecho hasta ejercicios de simulación, vamos actualizándonos con los últimos estudios y la última guía, pero a veces es dificultoso seleccionar bien los pacientes y también en plan, digamos, de trombectomía mecánica, al no tener por ahí disponible todos los recursos óptimos, ¿sí? Porque tenemos solamente tomografía con un tomógrafo de 16 canales, no podemos hacer de difusión y perfusión, y además las distancias, ¿sí? Que tenemos, digamos, si se llega a implementar el sistema de derivación a la sala de hemodinamia, con todos los retrasos que eso implica.
Sí, yo creo que es un buen comentario, pero que se puede resolver fácilmente porque son hospitales de que ella habla que con un servicio de ambulancia que ni siquiera está en la puerta, pero que arribe rápido, son menos de 10 minutos el traslado, y las cosas que yo creo que un tomógrafo 16 slide está muy bien, no es necesario más, solamente convencer al radiólogo que haga el CT angio, que es fundamental, primero para ver el acceso desde el arco aórtico, segundo para descartar una trombosis de la arteria carótida o una disección, y tercero para evaluar lo que pasó con este paciente de ayer, que cuando hablamos, dijimos, Vanessa nos comenta, bueno, tiene un NIS de 18, le dimos trombolítico y bajó a 9, y había entrado a las 4 y le dieron el trombolítico a las 20, con 4 horas, estaban en ventana, ahí había mejorado. Y lo primero que pensamos es que tenía buenas colaterales, y dijimos probablemente mañana profundice el infarto porque las colaterales terminan no siendo suficientes y fue lo que pasó. Pero lo bueno es que la posibilidad lo vamos a tener de desarrollar aquí en Bahía Blanca. Iris, Para mí es un placer que estés aquí, muchas gracias. Por favor, nos gustaría que compartas tu conferencia con nosotros y bienvenida de nuevo.
Thank you. Should be sound. Some conflicts of interest. The most relative one is that I'm co-founder and medical director of an imaging company that automatically interprets CT scans for stroke. Now, why am I so passionate about stroke? It all started back in the year 2006 with this patient here, a young American soldier who came to our hospital within half an hour of stroke onset. He was severely affected. His NIHS was 16. He could not move his arm, he could not move his leg, he could not speak. I call him patient zero because he's the patient that changed stroke treatment in our hospital and in Europe. What happened is he got thrombolysis because he was really early, and thrombolysis failed. And then our neurologist called me and said, Iris, wasn't there someone there who had a vacuum cleaner for the brain? Why don't you try this on this patient? And we said, well, okay, we can do this. And then he said, and by the way, this is an American patient. And I said, oh my God, not an American, much more likely to sue. Anyway, we solved the problem because his wife came down and the first question his wife asked was, is the device FDA approved? And I said, no, it's not even CE marked. And we called the inventor who lives in California, and with the time difference it worked, and we let the wife and the inventor talk to each other. And we took the patient into the cath lab. And what we found was this, an occlusion of the internal carotid artery. And this is what the penumbra aspiration device looked like at the time. We took the biggest catheter and we brought it up into the brain and we performed an aspiration. And within just 2 passes, that's what the vessel looked like. The vessel had opened. And whilst we were all standing around the screen admiring the vessels and how everything is open, we totally forgot about the patient. Until suddenly, he waved at us with his formerly hemiplegic hand and said, have you forgotten about me? And the patient came on a Tuesday. He discharged himself on a Thursday because he wanted to take part in a marathon run on the Saturday. He did not win, but he completed the marathon. And another interesting thing, what we pulled out of the brain was pure fat. Not cholesterol, it was pure fat. And later on we found that the patient had an aberrant lymphatic duct that went into the atrium, and he was later on operated on that. And we published it under the title Liposuction in Mind. And since then I get invitations to write for papers for liposuction. They obviously haven't read it. This is what the aspiration device looks like now. And yes, nowadays there's level 1A evidence. There have been several meta-analyses done. But even if we have level 1A evidence, we have 15 million strokes a year. And less than 1% receive thrombectomy. Now, what are the challenges? The challenges, although we have level 1A evidence, is that we do not have enough centers or interventionalists who can perform this procedure. Also, the question is, whom do we select? As you were saying, which are the patients which will profit most? And also, how can we train? How do we train the center? How do we train the interventionalist? And probably for the hospitals and for government, the most important one, how is it financed? Now, the cost effectiveness was the first thing that my hospital asked about. And the hospital did not care if I said, you know, the patient will be able to not cost for the next couple of years, loss of productivity, patient can work, patients will be much better later on. They said, no, what is the cost for our hospital? Because we have to pay for the intervention. They did not say they do not care about the outcome, but the main interest was, what is the actual cost for the hospital? And only second, what is the clinical outcome for the patient? So I started with looking at the clinical outcome. And I did something very simple. I just took 25 patients that we treated with thrombectomy versus 25 patients that we did not treat with thrombectomy before I came to the center. And just looking at the outcome here, what we found is that we had a significantly higher number of patients with a good outcome. You also see that there's a significantly higher number of patients with a really bad outcome in the patients that did not get thrombectomy. So what we found is that with thrombectomy, we had 56% of the patients who were independent afterwards, good outcome, modified ranking 0 to 2. And without, it was only 8%. Looking at the patients in the severe state of modified ranking 5 to 6, 60% versus 20%. Now what we did is we added the time. And I was quite generous. I said, okay, we presume that each procedure will take about 3 hours. The average time in the studies is 45 minutes, but of course you have to come to the hospital, you have to prepare the patient, you have to look at the patient afterwards. So I said, okay, let's take 3 hours. And let's also be generous with staff. And staff in the UK is quite expensive. So what we have here is we've got the prices for specialists, for consultants, consultant anesthetist, consultant interventionalist, consultant, and we have 2 radiographers, nurses, and anesthetic nurse. And then we also have the price for the actual material for the procedure. We also looked then at the probability of being dependent and wheelchair dependent, 4% versus 48%. Modified ranking score of 5, the most severe desolate state, 4% versus nearly half of the patient wheelchair dependent for life in it. So then we looked at the bed days. How long does a patient who has received thrombectomy stay in the hospital versus the patients that are discharged? And I did several calculations because some patients are sent to us from other hospitals and we will send them to a different hospital. So I did it differently of overall bed days and just bed days for us. And what we found, what we also looked at, we looked at the amount of physiotherapy sessions, of rehabilitation sessions. And again, significantly less rehabilitation time for the patient that got thrombectomy. And we were able to save one person, one man person, one physiotherapist per 13 patients. We found some other interesting things. So not just looking at rehabilitation, not just looking at significantly less bed days, but we also looked at serious adverse events. They are not counted in this separately. It's just another calculation. We also looked at how many extra procedures does the patient need, extra x-rays, extra interventions, PEG, for example, any other. Does the patient get aspiration pneumonia? Again, all of it significant. So what we found is that per patient, we save about $22,000 US just for the hospital, just looking at the length of stay and looking at the physiotherapy time. And for a catchment area as we have here, I would expect that you would have about 100 or probably even 150 patients that would be eligible for thrombectomy, which would relate to about $2 million US. Now the question is, whom do we select? And there are different ways of selecting a patient. And they're very complicated. You can do perfusion imaging, you can do other things, but there are also some basics that you can look at. And the easiest way is to look at how much damage does the patient already have. And one way of a structured approach of looking at it is using the aspect score. The aspect score gives you a possibility to really looking at all the areas in a structured way, and you are less likely to miss areas. And it is known that patients with a good aspect score have a much higher chance of a good outcome, and patients with an aspect score of 4 and below are unlikely to profit. And the aspect score was also used in all the big studies and is currently recommended by 19 guidelines. The problem is it's often difficult to do the aspect scoring. I would challenge you to see the damage here, and it is quite difficult, especially in these light conditions. But if you look carefully, you can already see where the damage is forming. Also, it is often very difficult to see the subtle changes, and you can see the swelling here in the Sylvian fissure in the lilac area. Or you can see here where the stroke is, and you can see that the sulci are much more swollen, they're swelling here. So you see where the stroke is, and these are early signs. Now the clinical reality, unfortunately, is that in 4 cases that you are called, it turns out to be a patient that is not eligible for thrombectomy. And that is why it is essential to do one more step in addition to looking at the images, and that is to do a CT angiography. The case tonight was a clear case. Hyperdense vessel sign. You do not need anything else. We knew there was an occlusion. It matched with the clinical symptoms. Do we really need a CT angio? No. A CT angio is useful probably for Alessandro to see what is the anatomy, but in a 65-year-old patient, we will know what to expect. But there are other patients where we do not see the hyperdense vessel sign. And you can now steer how many patients you are seeing and how often you get false positives by, for example, using an NIHSS score. And that is what we started with in our hospital. We said any patient that has an NIHSS score of 10 triggers the potential alarm. And in other centers as well as in our center, that brings you to 3 correct patients, to 3 wrong calls and 1 correct patient. So you have 25% of those patients will be the correct patients. And it is just the amount where you can still call your anesthetist, you can still call Alessandro without him saying, no, I'm quitting this, I'm not doing any strokes. And you will start with selecting those patients that are the best candidates and that are candidates for the thrombectomy. And in those patients, if you do not see the hyperdense MCA sign, that is where if the patient has a CT scan with an aspect score of 6 and above, you then automatically trigger CT angio. And then when you have the CT angio and you have the confirmation, these are the patients that will profit most. Later on, you can expand. If you have more people, you can expand. You can, in a couple of years, you can be more and do perfusion imaging and do more elaborate things. But at this stage, it's not necessary, because what was also the Dawn study based on? Was based on perfusion, but what were we looking at? We were looking at the infarct volume, the CBV, the core infarct volume, which is the same as you're looking at if you see hypodensity on the CT scan. So we've made it a bit easier, which is where my conflict of interest comes in, because I found it was so difficult to teach the surrounding hospitals to really interpret the scans, so we invented this software which does it for us. But the main thing why I need it is because it also connects the adjoining hospitals, and I see the images directly on my phone, and I love sailing, and I don't want to be called from the boat all the time for a case that is not a case, which is why we have this software where we can immediately see what is happening in the other hospital, and within seconds I have the image on my phone and I get a notification if it's a patient with a major vessel occlusion and a high aspect score. But you don't need it, you can also train. Train the centers, train the key people to do aspects interpretation, and that's what you can base your decision on. Now the question is, how do you become a center of excellence? How do we get trained? It is not easy from, honey, I did my first stent, to James Bond, license to treat. Quite a way. Now, those who know me know that I'm passionate about flying, and I do competition aerobatics. And how many of you flew here? I bet none of you would go into an airplane if you did not know that your pilot had done a couple of fake crash landings on a simulator. And I predict that in a couple of years, with the simulators having become so advanced, you will not be asking your surgeon, how often did you do this operation? You will say, how often have you practiced my specific case on the simulator? And that is the potential that we have at my university. We've got the simulator that gives you the same haptic feedback and reacts the same as it would feel in the vessel. They have changed from being expensive toys to being medical devices. So what I can do is, if one of us had a intracranial stenosis or a carotid stenosis, I could take your CT angio, put it on the simulator, and practice your specific case, and order the devices according to what I have in there. And for carotid stenting, it's a one-on-one already, and it's approved for selection of devices and for cases. And I'll quickly show you what it looks like. So this is how the simulation works, because it also works for team training. Because the next step, when the interventionist is trained, is that you need to be fast, and your team needs to have the role and needs to know where they have to go. So you see on the one side, you see the real-life experience. On the other side, you see the simulator. And what we did is we separate the team. So often, the cath lab nurse becomes the operator, and the two teams watch each other. And the example was, we were at the time involved in a study where we were doing trombectomy as the first step without thrombolysis. An ethics commission mandated that the patient has the arterial puncture within half an hour of randomization. And we did the first case on the simulator, and it took 1 hour 45. And I was banging my head and saying, no, how are we going to do this in reality? And we formed groups, and we tried to see and shave off every single minute. And in clinical reality, we are now at 22 minutes. Not as good as in Germany, where it's 8 minutes from CT to arterial puncture. But the reason our outcomes are so good are not because of the intervention, it's because of the time. Because every 6 minutes delay, the patient has a 1% lesser chance of a good outcome. Per 30 minutes delay, the patient slips on the modified ranking scale by 1 point. So the only important part is the speed. Now, I'm really pleased how Alessandro has managed and is really striving to bring the team from here. And when I spoke to the team yesterday, I was so impressed by the enthusiasm. And the team training that Alessandro went for is and the interventional training is a training according to the guidelines of the World Federation for Interventional Stroke Treatment. And it is not just how you bring the catheter up in the brain. Because as the interventionist, you need to know a lot more. And there are 17 different modules. So for example, we had to learn about imaging and image interpretation. CT, CT angio, CT perfusion, which patients to select. How to develop a structured pathway. How is it going to be organized in the hospital? Also learn about the anatomy, variants, veins, drugs, and the different devices. Sedation, general anesthesia, and of course dealing with complications. And here are some of the examples. Here, difficult problem to solve. And here, he solved it. So I'm really pleased, Marina, I'm really pleased to be able, Alessandro, I'll try again in Spanish. Es un honor de presentar a Alessandro el certificado de competencia en trombectomía en nombre de la Federación Mundial de Tratamiento Intervencional de Stroke.
Qué honor, ¿eh? Qué honor, ¿eh?
Thank you.
Qué honor, ¿eh? Muchas gracias, ¿eh?
Thank you. Wait, let me show it like this.
Muy bien.
Wait, will it? There. No, Alessandro has been an amazing student. It's been a hard time. We worked for 1 month. We started at 9 o'clock in the morning. We continued often till 11 o'clock at night. Then at dinner, he was quizzed on complications, anatomy, and you did the training during the night. I'm very pleased, and I think this is the possibility and your chance to show it the other way. This is really the chance that you have here to create the center and to really have the possibility of having the first trombectomy center here, and you have all the possibilities, and your center, I hope, will become one of the best in Argentina.
Qué emoción para mí, ¿no? Es decir, qué alegría. Fue duro el camino pero bueno, luchas, ¿no? Como en todo. Y bueno, lograr este certificado realmente no fue fácil, pero fue hermoso. Y lograr, es decir, yo me acuerdo en el último WIST, en el último ICA-Stroke, ahí en Varsovia, que había una cola de más o menos de 40 intervencionistas anotándose para poder entrar al entrenamiento con Iris. Yo no como sudamericano, pero me salté a la cola y ya la conocí a Iris, hablé y Jorge Siebert y Iris me hicieron una entrevista y por los antecedentes y demás me dijeron, tú eres, cuando vos me dijiste que iba a ser uno de los primeros oficialmente certificados por la WIST, ahí me acordé la enseñanza de uno de mis maestros que no me importaba el primero, pero sí quería hacerlo para ser el mejor en esto, por lo menos en esta área y poder ayudar pacientes. Te agradezco muchísimo, fue un entrenamiento hermoso, aprendí muchísimo y es un área impactante. Creo que tenemos experiencia en infarto, la podemos aplicar bien arriba, pero como vos bien dijiste, somos un eslabón en un grupo de trabajo. Esperemos que sea posible porque vamos a poder ayudar mucha gente. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.